to Abysmal. Tonight we're diving deeper into the darkest corners of Reddit, specifically the subreddit No Sleep. All these stories are going to be a bit longer, so they're perfect for you to just put in the background, listen to while you work, or maybe even try to go to sleep. But besides that, just sit back, relax, get a snack, or go to sleep, whatever suits your fancy. But without further ado, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. It's helping out a ton. I'm enjoying making these videos for y'all. I can't wait to see where we go. Thank you guys so much for all the love. Let's get into it. Something happened 63 years ago that's haunted me my entire life. I've never told anyone about it until now. It's official. I'm an old man. For the last couple of years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s. The math is simple and unforgiving. Today's my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes. This is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. In fact, once I cast my vote against the goddamn Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I found, though, that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've never told anyone this story because it scares me almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950, the setting a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around, and my mom was a chore whore. Boy, was I proud of myself when I came up with that one. So I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was a place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meager to say the least, but within the walls of that miserly structure, I could find no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I should be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep in until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library. And by bike, I mean a rusty log of shit attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady actually interrupted my innocent tongue clicking to hiss a shut the fuck up at me. The first time I ever heard a grown-up use the F word. Big fucking deal, I know. But in those days, it was unheard of. The dreary days turned to woeful weeks. I had actually begun praying for the school to start again, until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library, but one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection, I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That was where it all began. The door was windowless and made from oak that looked far older than the wall in which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was what appeared to be a single footprint. I had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I would encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door, and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I actually found was far more subtle. A small string dangling from above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into the darkness. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever it was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, and do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But of course, I didn't know that then, and I may not have listened even if I had. So instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only the dim glow from the string bulb far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right, I think. They just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and God, I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in thin lines from all four sides. A sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time, I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library, the most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles. Both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, the smell, was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better. Not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking, but I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought. I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid from me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed a book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat, always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin barren and directly across from myself. That armchair was mine. The other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then much better than I can now. But it wasn't mine, that's for damn sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate. A gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually, our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter. The workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure. Knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognize that the smell was actually the same as it had been before. That mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was the nasal version of an optical illusion, you know? The one that looks like a young woman glancing backward, but all of a sudden you see that it's really an old woman facing toward you. You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The spell was broken. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine, until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title, a large, leather-bound cover of solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood red ink atop the first page. Rest your sorrows, friend, and leave them where they lie. I stared at the sentence, mesmerized, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page, blank. The smell became stronger. Another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see. My own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. I stared at him disbelievingly. Who are you? I asked in my panicked voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat, once again, in his own. I fear we got off to a bad start, he said, glancing at the pile of sick on the carpet. The smell, it does take some getting used to. Who are you? I repeated. Tonight you will know hardship like you've never known before, he said. I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all other storms which lie ahead. I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. Your mother is dead, my boy, by her own hand, in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I must admit, he said in sorrowful tones. But was there a playful glint in his eye? Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one. My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. What do you want with me? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. Nothing but your friendship, dear boy, he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expounded. I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble, and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe, when I'm done, he sighed tiredly, running his bony fingers through his thin white hair. Maybe then my work can be yours. I stood up, shuffling toward the door, but never breaking his gaze. You're crazy, I told him. My mom isn't dead, she's not. See for yourself if you must, he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed round the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever, he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room. You know where to find me. I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs 2 at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying. He must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I've lived in that small town in Maine my entire life, although I've kept mostly clear of the public library. Once in my late 20s, I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear had begun to morph into idle curiosity. Where the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall. I asked the librarian what had become of that basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. There was no basement, she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had her facts correctly, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in the area. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long ago birthday. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money, and beat me to within an inch of my life, when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it. And again, when she miscarried our fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick completely shit-faced and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now, I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now, I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library, and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right. My road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will ever get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief, a refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him. A package marked Return to Sender by Manon Lisette. My neighbor is one of those annoying wannabe YouTube personalities. Over the years, I've seen him cough out cinnamon, lay flat on the hood of his car as it slowly creeps down the driveway, and douse himself in lukewarm water, all the while screaming, "Epic win! Epic fail!" or "Fuck! Epic maintenance of the status quo!" For all I know, it can get tiring to watch him go about his shenanigans in the pursuit of viral fame. So, when he knocked on my door the other day, told me he was going away for a few weeks, and asked that I get his mail, honestly, it was a relief. I can't explain the peace of mind I had, knowing I didn't have to brace myself for any of his stupidity for a while. I was always afraid his stunts would wind up bleeding over into my life. Things were pretty normal for the first couple of days. He received a few bills, a bit of spam, and what I could only assume was a birthday card. Then, one evening, I got home to find a cardboard box waiting on his front porch. In big red letters was written, "Return to sender." I'm no small fry, but I admit I had trouble lifting the box on my own. It was really freaking heavy. Lugging it across the road to my house was even harder, and I quickly realized there was no way I was going to drag it up the stairs and through my front door. I decided I'd leave his package in my garage. It wasn't like I kept my car in there. The garage door was a piece of shit that refused to open without a good thug and a whack. It was less trouble just leaving the car in the driveway than it was to fight with the garage door every morning and night. In hindsight, I should have set the package down while I struggled to open the tricky door, but you know how it is when you've got a good grip on something. No point in setting it down if you don't have to. It was as I kicked the door for a third time that I lost my grip on the package, and it fell to the ground. I heard a light crack inside. Shit, I cursed. I hope I hadn't broken anything important, but I figured I just wouldn't tell my neighbor about it and let him assume the break happened en route. Hands free, I finally managed to get the garage door unstuck, and boy did it screech in protest as it rolled up and over me. I dragged the box the rest of the way, setting it in the corner for whenever my neighbor would come back to claim it, and then I forgot all about it. Until a few days passed, that is. I'm not sure exactly how long it took for the smell to waft in from the crack under the garage to house door, but it came in slow progression. It was a sickly, sweet odor similar to a skunk, and for the first few days after I smelled it, I genuinely assumed that's exactly what it was. Roadkill that had left its mark on my house. It was only when I realized the scent was growing more intense instead of fading that I went looking for a source. That's when I opened the garage door, and that's when the odor knocked me back, holding my nose. The culprit wasn't hard to identify. The only change in my garage was the box in the corner. I remember thinking it must have been one of those meat of the month subscription boxes. The meat must have gone rancid from being left out of the fridge for so long. How much meat could have been in there for the box to have been so large and heavy? An entire freaking cow? I covered my nose as I approached the box, a pair of scissors in my hands. I probably wouldn't have needed them to open it as it had become soggy enough at the bottom to poke through with a finger, but I wasn't about to poke my finger into spoiled meat juices. That soggy bottom was the reason I had to open the box in the first place. If I tried to drag it out whole, everything would spill onto the floor. I was going to have to dump the pieces of meat one garbage bag at a time and take them down to the dumpster, a process I wasn't looking forward to. My scissors tore through the tape along the top of the cardboard box. I thought the smell couldn't get any worse, but as I flipped the flaps open, I discovered a whole new gamut of stink. It was like opening a burning oven, but instead of a heat wave, I was met with waves of piss, sweat, shit, and putrefaction. It was so bad that I staggered back and had to force down the puke, begging to guzzle out of me. I don't think I could have handled that scent mingling with the horrors coming out of the box. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran out the door for a breath of fresh air, but in the short time I'd spent in the garage, the smell had become so ingrained in the fabric of my clothes that it clung to me like a shadow. Nothing I tried could keep the smell out of my nostrils. Not air fresheners, not a face mask, not 3 showers and a change of clothes. Every second that box lay open in my garage was another second the smell was allowed a foothold into my home. I had to bite the bullet. I returned to the garage, the flaps of the box still open as though inviting me to look. I was prepared, a clothespin pinning my nostrils shut, a garbage bag in one hand with the strongest cleaner I could find in the other, and long rubber gloves to keep my skin from having to touch what was inside. But, as it turns out, I needed none of those things. I wouldn't have to touch or clean the contents of the box. I would only have to suffer the nightmares every night. You see, there was meat in that box, but it didn't come from a cow or a pig. No, it was worse than that. It was my neighbor, dead, still in one piece, but dead. I called the cops and naturally they took me in for interrogation. It's kind of hard not to suspect a man with a corpse in his garage after all. Thankfully, they soon realized I wasn't involved. My DNA might have been all over that box, The smell might have left a mark throughout my house, but there was one piece of irrefutable evidence in my neighbor's own hands that proved my innocence: a vlogging camera. They showed me the footage only once. I'm not sure if they were allowed to, or they felt so bad for me they figured it couldn't hurt. Either way, I saw it. My neighbor was sitting in the box outside of a shipping facility, laughing as he told the world how he was going to mail himself across state lines. He'd brought pee bottles, food, a pillow, and a few flashlights. His friend, a guy I'd seen at his place several times to help with his stunts, closed the lid and presumably dropped him off for shipment. Throughout the next couple of hours or days, I'm honestly not sure, my neighbor recorded a few short clips about his progress. "I think I'm in the truck now, I can feel it moving. Must be in a warehouse, pretty warm here, still got plenty of food." That kind of stuff. And then on the last entry, the box toppled over. He broke his neck, and that was it. The camera recorded until either the memory card got too full or the battery died. There's one thing I didn't tell the police after they showed me the video. One thing I heard in the footage that still haunts me to the day I die. Just after the tumble that broke his neck, I heard the familiar screeching sound of my garage door. I found an extremely bizarre internet survey by Mr. Outlaw. Nobody knows what rock bottom truly is until they've hit it. Being abruptly fired from a job you've worked at for the past 10 years and then catching your girl cheating on you with your replacement really makes a man think, hell, my student loans aren't even paid off yet. What a shit show this life is. After a rather boozy night that consisted of sending out about 4 dozen resumes and horrendously written cover letters, I passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to at least try and make some money at home while waiting for an interview. At that moment, I thought that the best way to go about it was completing those internet surveys that yielded $5 Subway gift cards and other shit like that after about an hour of answering questions. I mean, I didn't have any of the marketable skills that could have yielded immediate income. It was either that or wasting the day away playing computer games. At least I wouldn't have to pay for food. I did these surveys for about 5 hours before nearly passing out. It was way more excruciating than I had originally anticipated. At the end of those 5 hours, I'd accumulated about $45 in cash and gift cards. $9 an hour. Not like I was making much more than that before. I was about to close my laptop up for the day and head to a bar in an attempt to drown out the melancholy when I first saw it. It shouldn't even have been noticeable, but for one reason or another, it was. At the bottom corner of the website that I was on existed a tiny, singular advertisement. Maybe it was the simplicity that got me. Plain black letters in a tacky font that read, "Surveys for cash," overlapped a completely white background. At least they were direct with the message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. Might as well scrape together a little bit more booze money before heading out. I sat back down, clicked on the picture link, and prepared myself to grind through some more painstaking inquiries. The first few questions were simple enough. I guess they weren't really questions, but more data collection. My name, age, and occupation. I thought it was kind of weird that they also asked my height and weight, but it wasn't unheard of. The first real question was a different story though. I must have stared at it, eyes wide and mouth agape, for God knows how long. What the actual hell? In plain English, this is what popped up on my screen. How strong is your urge to currently look behind you? There were 5 options below, ranging from not at all to overwhelming. There was no feasible reason why I should have been afraid at that moment, but I was. I tightened my breathing, trying to make out any subtle noises behind me. There were none. After maybe about 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to look. There was nothing. I sighed in relief and scoffed at myself at the same time. This must have been some kind of joke. However, I decided to entertain it, answering neutral and clicking onto the next question. This is what it read. Why would you look behind you? I smirked. Funny, before simply typing in "I don't know" in the response box and once again clicking next. This was the third question. You're on a plane. Apart from you, there's only one other passenger, who is sitting somewhere behind you. At some point, you get up to go to the washroom and find that the man is gone. You check to see if he is in the only bathroom on the plane, but he isn't. What do you do? Again, I must have stupidly stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Was this some kind of obscure personality test? I mean, it must have been, right? Right? I put the answer that I used for the last question. I don't know. It was true. I didn't know. How was I supposed to answer this shit? I clicked next again, now more intrigued than anything. The fourth question went like this. You wake up in woods unfamiliar to you. It's nighttime, and the moonlight provides you with only slight visibility. About 30 feet away from you, there's a small, dimly illuminated cabin. The door is open, and a smiling woman is motioning for you to come in. Do you go? Explain why. This question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one, so my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test was still feasible. I actually make an attempt to answer this one. Something along the lines of going into the cabin because there's simply nowhere else to go. Once again, I click next. Probably shouldn't have. The questions started getting fucked up. They weren't too gory or explicit, not anything like that. They were just stranger, weirder, and more psychologically disturbing. If you're wondering why the hell I kept going, I can't really give you an explicit answer to that. I just felt like I had to. It was an esoteric, creeping sensation that I can't quite explain away, but I could never shake it, so I just went on. Some of the questions that stood out were, suppose that you wake up one night to find an elevator in your house. During every midnight after that, it opens up for 5 minutes, revealing an exact copy of yourself that gets progressively more injured as time goes on. Do you keep living like this, or do you enter the elevator once and end it all? And you're in a hotel room, but are woken up by a rapid knocking at your window. You peek through the blind, seeing what appears to be a man missing both his eyes. He puts his mouth to the glass and tells you to kill the woman in the bathroom immediately. Do you listen to him? This was one of my least favorites. You are watching home videos with your mother. One of the tapes include footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. Your mother simply laughs at this footage without saying anything. In your opinion, is this a cause for concern? In addition to this insanity-inducing shit, there was some rather disconcerting events happening in real life as well. I received a knock at the door about 30 minutes in. I looked through my peephole to find a guy standing there, frantically shaking his head and mouthing no while making direct eye contact with me. He looked terrified. Obviously, I didn't open up. I received about 10 phone calls from somebody named The Auditor on my caller ID. They left a message every time, but each one was just a recording that consisted of somebody saying numbers through heavy static. Actually, it sounded more like screaming now that I think about it. About an hour into this thing and I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. I was petrified of looking behind me, even though there was no indication that anything could have been there. I heard some soft scratching coming from my vent at one point, so I moved my couch over it. Eventually, I reached what appeared to be the end of the survey. However, it wasn't a question, it was simply a statement. Don't let them in, they're not to be trusted. Almost as if it were on cue, I heard more knocking at my door about 5 seconds after reading this. As slowly and silently as I could, I moved over and looked through the peephole once again. It was a different person than the one I'd seen earlier. She was a woman, looking to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing a thick blazer, despite it being around 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside. She was also wearing sunglasses, so I could never really tell where she was looking. She eventually took a piece of paper out of her pocket and slipped it under the door. I looked down and read it. It's lying. Leave your apartment immediately. It's been about half an hour since. I can't bring myself to look at the computer screen nor at the woman outside. She's still there. I can see the shadows of her feet from underneath my door. I heard my bedroom window open a few minutes ago, but I've since jammed the door shut with a chair. I can hear some kind of distorted muttering coming from behind it now. Maybe rock bottom wasn't so bad, but what the fuck am I supposed to do here? Don't Let Them In by Coney Island Queen. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it and sung her to sleep, sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7 and I kept them in a matchbox. The missing pieces of her kept safe, so she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell down around us and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage and the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters the radiators would bleed rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it home. My sister Annie mothered me with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our hips before they were fully grown. She always let me shower first so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to make do with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe. Like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right and she'd had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the backseat of the car, coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was mother and who was daughter. Radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavy, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never tell us when. One day we'd just wake up to an empty house and the fridge packed full, post-it note on the front with a smear of mom's lipstick and the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling, mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast until the AM, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, refrigerator a gaping hole in the wall. She chained smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet, and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window, and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting on the crater of my collarbones. When mom drank too much was the worst. She'd laugh too loud and too long at anything and everything until her mouth started to shake and she started crying at the breakfast table into her cereal. Annie shut down when mom was like this, went somewhere deep inside herself where nobody could hurt her. She'd stay up in the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5, I'd cry when I'd find my mom passed out cold on her bed, sure she could never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears, tell me she was only sleeping just like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face and the vomit from her mouth, changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night and mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring down the line, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends, hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip glosses and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she got the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane, eaten the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness in the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her shitty Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that mom wouldn't come home, that she'd just stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, me and Annie weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back up, gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I bent down to pick her up, I'd caught her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too, couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stare down at her, blonde hair falling into her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. And then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we'd dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them. Pieces we could never put back. Outside through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. Clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching Annie on her knees picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food, not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I forgave her. Mom never cooked dinner, or remembered my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid, or stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off. Crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch. Or maybe even Lucky Strike, the cat that junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles. But Annie always stopped me, saying once you start giving, they never stop taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines, right next to the ashtray left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams will come true, said Annie, grinning. She stopped laughing, voice quieter, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy, let's wish. So we did. The sounds of crying interrupted us. It was closer this time and definitely human. We turned to each other, confused. Annie shrugged and I squinted out into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost and tired alone. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe she walked around the back? Shit, do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply, and I sighed, rolling my eyes. Guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice strained. I turned to her, smiling. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own. Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark, past me, opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the catch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I'd found what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence was a person, crouched with their knees tucked up neat under the chin, arms wrapped around legs, their mouth hung wide, softly opening and closing as he cried, like a child lost in the dark. Not like a child, but as someone pretending, mimicking the sound, open and closed out in the blackness. Suddenly they straightened, snapping upright, face still hidden by the black. They were tall and thin, too thin to be a normal person. Panic made me move. Animal instincts left over from the days we lived up in the trees carried me forward. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly walked towards the house, steps deliberate and long. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I turned to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. I'm gonna call the cops, and everything's gonna be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes, dripping like the promise of rain. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs, charging. A soft tap, tap, tapping filled the silence. Annie turned to the window, eye white showing. Her eyes were so wide. It was the sound of someone's forehead against the glass, slowly, over and over. They started to speed up, faster and harder, skin meeting glass until they were slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. The tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and the loudest slam yet. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to break it. We ran upstairs, 2 at a time, skipping the ones caved in with dry rot on instinct. I turned behind me once, and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of broken glass echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom, locking the door. A thin, wailing cry, like a baby calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and locked doors. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching the knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I did the same, shoulder to shoulder. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, deliberate and casual. The crying had become mocking, almost laughter, shrill bursts of sound and then giggles, high-pitched and abruptly stopping before starting again. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. "What the fuck is going on?" asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife onto my hands, thumb pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist, a winding red road, still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched wail followed. I held my breath, could feel my heart beat in the base of my throat, a wild and frantic thing. "I'm gonna get my phone from the room." I shook my head violently, about to argue. Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. "Yes, I'm gonna get the phone and I'm gonna call the cops and we're going to be okay." I shook my head again. "It's the only way. When I go, I need you to lock the door and you don't open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me." I shook my head and Annie pressed her hand into my mouth, crushing my teeth against my lips so it made my eyes water. "Yes, promise me, Em." Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. "Promise," she mouthed, and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles, and then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. "Em?" came a voice through the door. I started, hands gripping the knife. "Honey, what's going on?" "Mom?" my voice cracked. "Is that you?" I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking, trying to keep myself still. "Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door, it's okay, just let me in." The handle rattled again, gentler. "Just let me in, it's all okay." She banged on the door and I took my handle off the bolt. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother, please." Her voice broke and she started to cry. "Just let me in, baby, I'm sorry." I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me like when I was a kid and I'd come in off the swings with a scraped knee. Maybe this time she meant it. Maybe it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. "Yeah, Emily, let us in. It's all okay." My hand froze on the bolt and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. My hand banged on the door, handle rattling. "Emily, let us in." Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, voice getting louder and louder. "Let us in, let us in, let us in, let us in," over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray don't crawl out from under the bed. "That's not my sister and you're not my mother," I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub and curled in a ball, cradling myself, knife clutched to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside the door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that yelled at me when I changed the TV channel, the one that sang me a happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covering my eyes, waiting to die. Arms found me and lifted me from the tub, carrying me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was carried downstairs. It was covered in long, scraping claw marks, dragged down to the floor. Pillows ripped apart covered the hallway in soft down, like it had snowed inside. I watched them drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been torn apart by something feral. Outside in our driveway were police cars and an ambulance. In the middle of it all was Annie, bathed in blue and red light as it washed over her, lit up in the dark like a neon angel, face aglow. I threw myself from the cop's shoulder and ran to her, holding us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we made up. Gentle screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache as I understood. Turns out there was no demon, no wild animal or bad men trying to break in. Just Mom, out of her mind on booze and drugs and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together, no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and you never get back up. Annie had seen her in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, rail thin and desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the drink I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found it, I'd come to hunt for the stash she hid in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs on the other side of the door, so high she could mimic Annie's voice almost perfectly. Turns out the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that come in a bottle or a needle at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most, but it's up to you if you let them in. Alright guys, well that wraps up today's video. These were a few mind-bending, some were creepier, some had a nice little plot twist to them, but I'm enjoying making this. I think that the next video we're going to make is 4chan stories, so please be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, share this video. I hope you guys tune in next week as well. Thank you guys for everything. Goodbye.